Hello. Our story begins inside of Shaak Ti's meditation chamber. She was in deep thought. Several minutes before her meditation began, she attempted to stop Anakin from leaving the temple. He had certifiably said that he was the chosen one, and that he needed to be there. His rush action could certainly sway the direction of the event, and Shaak Ti decided it best to leave it up to the masters of the council to handle it. She trusted Mace, Saci, Kit, and Agan, because they would have no issue resolving it. She had a firm belief that they would accomplish their task before Anakin actually arrived. In her meditation, she could feel a swift change in the Force, like something had changed. The Force was already out of balance. The war had made sure that much was certain. But there was something else plaguing her mind. She searched for answers, digging deeper into the Force. She could hear calls and cries. She could feel terror and fear. Something terrible was happening, but it wasn't an isolated event. Like an untouchable sensation, she drew herself closer to it, trying to find the answer. At this current moment, she was unaware if these feelings revolved around something that had yet to occur. Regardless of the answer, she was positive in her own heart that she needed to listen to the Force and find the reality the Force was trying to project into her mind. The deeper she went, the more her heart fell, and her eyes sank further into what she was seeing. This death and destruction. It wasn't the future, it was the now. It wasn't inside the executive building, but it started there. This tragedy was all over the galaxy. She followed it from the executive building across the skylines of Coruscant, and as she felt it, her eyes darted open and she swung her body around with an incredible jolt. Shaak Ti lifted her hands before her chest and used all of her strength to stop the ignition of Anakin's saber. The blade had actually already started to ignite, and she had stopped it right before it could breach her skin. She threw her hands out and pushed Anakin backwards as she rose to her feet, igniting her own lightsaber. Anakin's robe was covering his face, but under it, she could see the same certainty as before. Yet it was plagued. Something was dearly wrong with this. He was doing something he shouldn't be doing. Shaak Ti levitated backwards, using the Force to guide her movement, and she planted herself firmly on the ground. Her face was sturdy, and her eyes followed each of Anakin's movements. He told her that he was here to do what he must, and as he said that, an explosion rocked the temple. Shaak Ti demanded an answer for what he had done, but it didn't come, as he charged her. He may have been a fierce warrior, but she was a council master for a reason. She parried and blocked, spinning away and throwing her lightsaber into the door panel, locking it. He was not leaving this room. Skywalker grinned, telling her that she had certified her own death. Shaak Ti didn't really like that tone, believing that in her error to trust the council in the executive building, Palpatine and Anakin must have lured them into a trap. She had two choices as she ducked away from a strike that left a gash in the wall. Shaak Ti darted around Anakin, blocking his strike with a reverse grip, before dragging the saber around into her hand a different way. She eyed the chosen one, the individual he himself proclaimed himself to be. She felt the vibration of her saber and thought on her actions. She could attempt to defeat Skywalker, which she felt was an uphill challenge, being that he had already beaten Dooku in the previous few days. Or she could talk him out of this, to see if they could try and save the temple from falling. As an individual who was renowned for her empathy and her compassion, she decided to choose the latter. However, Skywalker made it extremely clear that he had no intention to give her a chance to make that choice. Their blades interlocked in the center of the room. Anakin attempted to use his overbearing strength against her, but Shaak Ti, as any true Jedi Master understood, to win a saber duel was to not exert one's own strength over another. It was the mastery of one's own skills, patience, and harmony with the Force. That same Force was her guide, as she slid to the side, slapping her lightsaber over her head and defending another strike before stepping back, pulling her foot away from a strike that bled to the floor. Anakin tried using his domineering strength against her, but she didn't intend to allow that to happen. For Shaak Ti, there could be no unnecessary strikes here, and she used that to her advantage, allowing Skywalker to overexert himself early into this engagement. She tried to rally together her thoughts. Before he left the temple, she tried to talk to him, to get him to relax, as he seemed on edge. Then nothing she tried in that moment seemed to work. Now that she knew what Palpatine had done, which was seemingly turn the clone army against the Jedi Order, as could be heard by the clones yelling outside the room as they called commands to each other, she had an idea of how she could play this. Shaak Ti flipped from Ataru to Makashi, thrusting her blade around her body and using the momentum to cut through Anakin's offense. She backpedaled around, and told Anakin that this was not him. He needed to see that right here and right now. He rolled his shoulders, which signified he was getting ready for another powerful barrage. Shaak Ti extinguished her lightsaber, allowing Anakin to swing down at her, as she used the movement against him, allowing his forward energy to throw him off balance as she pulled him in her previous direction and spun around, igniting her lightsaber and pointing it outwards behind her. She slowly brought it around to her torso and held it vertically. She shook her head at him when he turned around, reminding him that this wasn't going to go the way he wanted it to. His face contorted, and she called him out on his actions, going for deep cuts instead of emotional praise, because he didn't deserve that now. Her only goal was stopping his crusade of madness and focusing on saving the younglings who were in danger because of his actions. She told him that he might think that the Chancellor was his friend, but his goals for himself did not include a place at the table for Skywalker. If Palpatine really cared, then Maul and Dooku would not be cast off so easily. Palpatine watched Anakin kill Dooku. Obviously, Shaak Ti didn't know about the execution, but it was in the report that Skywalker killed Dooku during the duel with the Chancellor overlooking the fight. She steadied herself, moving to her right as he moved to his right to mimic her actions, as they moved in a circle. She asked him what Palpatine would do when he was finished with the Jedi. There was nothing for Skywalker at the end of this story. Absolutely nothing, because for Palpatine, he only craved Skywalker's power. Anakin responded to that last part with a grit, demanding to know what the Jedi craved from him. She quickly, without a hint of hesitancy, told him that they wanted his insight, his care, his intention. They cared about who he was because he was different. They challenged him because they believed he could be the best of them, but he had yet to show it. And now, right here, he was proving every single one of his doubters right. Anakin rushed her, and she moved slyly out of the way, confirming something he should have always known. But she was not among those doubters. She believed. Shaak Ti knew that challenges would be difficult, but she knew that he would overcome them. And that was the problem. He hadn't. There was a crack in her voice, like it genuinely hurt her heart knowing that Anakin hadn't overcome the challenges set before him. Another explosion rocked the temple, knocking holocrons and pictures off of her shelves. Shaak Ti looked down at one of the pictures, seeing the face of her first student, an individual she had probably already lost to the purge, so she cut deeper, asking Anakin if he wanted Ahsoka to die. Did he want that for her? All of his pain over her choice to leave the Order just for her to join and come back and die by his decision? Did he really? She stopped, blocking a strike and parrying another, before switching back to Ataru and shoving Anakin backwards, showing her first sign of aggression in their fight. Did he want Ahsoka to die by the hands of her best friends? It was all the men that had served with her since Christophsis who joined her at Mandalore, were they not? Anakin just gave Ahsoka a death sentence at the hands of Rex, Jesse, Vaughn, and who else? Anakin could name them, couldn't he? What about Obi-Wan? Their blades collided, and this time more intense. Anakin tried to get her to stop, trying to silence her words, but she refused. Their blades tangled over the center of the room where the crest of the Jedi Order sat on the floor. Shaak Ti defended quickly, but showed signs of aggression. She wasn't going to let these children inside this temple pay for Anakin's mistakes, as a man and as a Jedi. They continued to bat at each other, as Shaak Ti stepped away, knowing the exact moment to quit, before she took advantage of Anakin's belief that she was done for. She smashed his lightsaber back into the ground and used the Force to leverage him into the wall. She stopped, lowering her guard for a short moment, asking if Obi-Wan deserved to die for all of this. What about the clones? Did Palpatine also tell Anakin what he would be doing to the senators? Surely that had to matter to him. Anakin got furious, but Shaak Ti faked a duck, knowing that Anakin would anticipate it, as she backed away, blocking a strike and slipping around to block another, before striking into Anakin's defense. The two opponents continued to trade blows with one another, before they broke off again. Shaak Ti told Anakin that he didn't consider that, did he? His friend from Naboo, Padme Amidala? She had been targeted by Dooku how many times? What about the poor soul Anaconda Farr who was killed? Or the fact that Rush Clovis was able to get so entrenched in the Senate and within his relationship to Padme? Every single one of those instances were not by coincidence, were they not? Anakin and the Jedi were the victim of a plot, something Fives had uncovered, and they didn't listen. Maybe that was her fault, or his because Anakin was the last person to see Fives alive. But at the end of the day, at the end of all of this, Anakin had the knowledge that so many people he cared about had been drastically affected by Palpatine, but he decided in the end to choose that Sith. Ahsoka would have never left the temple without the war. Barriss would have never bombed the temple without the war. Billions wouldn't be suffering or dead without this war, and everything Anakin had suffered and endured over the past 3 years wouldn't have happened without Sidious, without his best friend Palpatine. She said that and gestured to his forearm, something she was very well aware he was insecure about, being that they had talked about it in the months prior. Silence filled the room. The buzzing of their sabers were all that could be heard. Shaak Ti looked towards the exit. She was getting impatient, because those poor babies didn't know why this was happening. Their lives were getting taken from them at this very second, and Anakin stood here silently, waiting for something to come to his mind. Shaak Ti broke through his lack of action, and told him to get a grip, to make a decision for himself for once, to stop being a pawn of Palpatine's game, to think. Her voice again cracked as she told him that children were dying because of his actions. They wouldn't be saved until they stopped those clones from what they were doing right now. Anakin stuttered and couldn't find the words. The expression that sat on his face before he left the temple abandoned his face. He had the strong expression of a man, and now he had the broken gaze of a child, one who had acted out like a disobedient adolescent. He didn't get his way once in the last 3 days, and the whole galaxy had to pay for it. Even though that wasn't the whole truth, it was true enough for her. Anakin knew his side of the reality, but she wasn't wrong. The only difference is, Padme was dying, and he sided with the person who tried to have her killed numerous times over the past 3 years. He told her in a broken voice that they needed to save the Jedi. They needed to right this wrong. She pointed towards the door with her lightsaber. She wasn't going to trust him again. The door was cut down, and he rushed out before her, calling out for Commander Appa so that they could stop this assault. Shaak Ti, on the other hand, rushed out and sped towards the youngling corridors. When she got close, she could hear blasters and lightsabers. She cut around the corner, and the doors were opened, and in the back, a group of knights were guiding the younglings into a formation to escape as a group of 6 temple guards defended the hallway. Shaak Ti closed her eyes, hoping that these clones may forgive her in their afterlife. It was never her intention to hurt these men, and she had done a fine job thus far, having cut through blasters or arms, but these children were in danger, and the clones were not about to hurt them. Shaak Ti rushed towards the back of the line, swinging her lightsaber with finesse through their lines, cutting through their backs, their shoulders, jabbing into their chests and their heads. The Temple Guard unit was on the brink of collapse, and they couldn't do much because they were defending younglings with their bodies, so they couldn't do much to protect themselves. Shaak Ti used the Force to launch more clones as the guards ran towards her and covered her from the front and the back, as more troopers started to ferry towards them. Shaak Ti looked to the knights and quickly thought of an escape route. She was hoping to gather up the younglings in one area, but so much was unknown right now. Sindralik wasn't responding, and there were no other counselors inside the temple aside from her. She took the 6 guards with her and led this unit of younglings away from this corridor. She realized that the safest location had to be the council chambers. There was one way in, one way out. It could be a death trap or a safe location. She decided to not take them there. Maybe the hangar bay. They rushed to the corridors, gaining more allies along their route, as Skywalker elsewhere inside the temple was turned on by his own men for trying to help the Jedi. It didn't matter that he was supposed to be safe. He was protecting the Jedi, and the clones weren't programmed to save him. If he was assisting the insurgents, they were ordered to massacre. Skywalker was clipped in the shoulder, but aside from that miniature injury, he was able to cut through his own men. It wasn't something he wanted to do, but at this current moment, his only choice was to kill them, because they were too vast, and the Jedi Temple was vastly unprepared. What Skywalker didn't know was the fact that an individual without a name was tasked with trapping the Temple guards. Grand Inquisitor was fending off his own brothers and sisters inside the Jedi archives, which is why the Temple Guard unit wasn't anywhere to be seen. When Shaak Ti reached the hangar bay, it was completely locked down. However, she had accumulated a large group of knights, masters, and able-bodied Padawans for this strike. She led them into the bay, as a few Jedi in hiding rushed out to join their brothers and sisters, as they led an aggressive counter-strike on a completely unprepared unit of clone troopers. They were actually getting ready to stop Bail Organa from landing here, because his ship had been spotted, but instead they got attacked from behind. Shaak Ti took point, using the last little bit of energy she had at the moment to cut through the main group of troopers before the 6 temple guards with her took point to save Bail Organa from the 6 or 7 clones by the landing dock. Bail took cover behind his vessel as the guards ran to him to make sure he was alright, which he was. The clones were so unprepared for this counter, and now the hangar was clear. It was also very clear that the clones were splitting up their forces to hunt the remainder of the Jedi. Shaak Ti held her hand on a ship that wasn't going to be used and caught her breath, After assigning knights to squads of Padawans and younglings and sending them off to different locations around the galaxy, she believed that isolation is what would be best for the Order right now. The first task group was sent to Meridon, another to Yavin 4, and the third, which was the largest, was sent to Dantooine. The Temple Guards watched the ships depart from the hangar bay, as Bail surprised Shaak Ti. She knew the Senator was here, but she had assumed he had left already. Shaak Ti continued to hold her breath, and then release it as she tried to calm her heart down. She was exhausted. Between fighting Skywalker, saving him, and then getting all the way here, she was ready for a break. She told Bail that she was going to give him and this unit of Temple Guards a task. They were going to go back to the executive building and see if they could find information inside the security center about how this happened. It would be integral for stopping a potential Palpatine uprising. She then expressed to the Temple Guards that they were to not engage with the Sith Lord. He was apparently too deadly for Windu, Saesee, Kolar, and Fisto, so they were not to engage with him. They agreed. She turned to Organa and told him to inform Amidala that her friend Skywalker was not to be trusted. He agreed, and the Temple Guards turned back, following Organa back to the vessel. Shaak Ti, as she was getting ready to get on the move again, got a message from Master Kelleran back, informing her that Grogu had been secured and was getting taken off to an ally from Naboo. She thanked him. Shaak Ti trusted Jar Jar and Kelleran with the child. On the other hand, she needed to figure out where the rest of the Temple Guard unit was, and try to save as many stragglers as she could. In her mind, she was not at all concerned with Anakin. If he died, then that was his own penance. But he had made a terrible mistake, and the Jedi were paying for it. Shaak Ti rushed through the hallways, thankfully using this time to catch her breath. She was trying to be kind to the clones, but as it turns out, she needed to save her brothers and sisters who were targeted by a terrible plot instead. Shaak Ti used the sound of blaster fire to lead her to more Jedi struggling. It was here where she helped free more knights from the clutches of the clones. No one had seen Skywalker, because most were curious where he went due to this being his division. With this knowledge, Shaak Ti came to the conclusion that he had died in the conflict, but she carried on. Her target was the Jedi Archives, because Jocasta Nu and Terra Nube likely had some groups of younglings with them. Every time Shaak Ti got into an engagement, she collected more Jedi Knights, Masters, Padawans, and younglings. It was, again, a growing group until she reached the Jedi Archives themselves. Inside, the Temple Guards were struggling, but in the middle of their struggle was a turncoat. He leapt over his brothers with the intention of killing one of them, and Shaak Ti launched her hand outwards, sending the Grand Inquisitor flying from his feet and slamming into a bookshelf. She gestured her hands outwards, as if to say, secure the archives and find the survivors, which the other Jedi and guards did. Grand Inquisitor got to his feet, calling Shaak Ti by name without the word master before it. She looked shamefully at the fallen Jedi, and she told him to surrender, and he laughed at her, like they would ever survive this. He explained that, like Pong Krell, he was a survivor, and he joined the winning side. However, unlike Krell, he planned on living his life with a seat at the table in an era of empire. She swung her saber in her hand, telling him that he would never see the age of empire, and the galaxy would never face its oppression. He charged her. Shaak Ti decided to challenge this, which nearly caught the Inquisitor off guard, as he kept on the ground and swung aggressively at her. Pike and saber collided. His yellow guardsman Pike swung violently in a circle before clashing with her blade, which tossed her off balance as she backed into a shelf. Master T dodged a strike and parried, interlocking her blade before sliding to the left with her hips to avoid getting cut with the back end of the pike. She kicked the Inquisitor's feet out from under him, before leaping to a table. She was showing her exhaustion. Her fighting was sloppy and her energy was drained. A lot of that due to a mass amount of death around her and how much she had done since getting out of Anakin's duel. Luckily for her though, the Jedi were starting to make a pushback, and the archives were falling back into Jedi control. The clones were struggling to get a steady foot in the door, and for them, this meant that more focus was getting driven to a location they couldn't get through. Shaak Ti blocked a strike from Grand Inquisitor, who tried to take her legs out. She kicked him in the jaw before leaping backwards off the table that he cut into pieces. She was focusing on her Makashi, while also using a bit of Form 3 to defend herself, to the best of her advantage. Grand Inquisitor didn't care for this defense, as he charged her, using all of his strength and slashing through archival data and tables and relics and pillars holding Jedi history. His lack of care was astounding, especially for a Jedi Temple Guard. But she held her own every time he got remotely close to hitting her. Shaak Ti slid to the side, ducking to the left and parrying forward with an aggressive strike, jabbing her blade through the Inquisitor's blade and smashing him across the face. He grinned in excitement, using the pain to fuel his anger. Shaak Ti retreated back into Form 2 and defended herself, but lost balance, falling backwards. Grand Inquisitor gloated over her, pondering the Emperor's excitement when he brought a counselor's head back to him. She rolled her eyes in annoyance, using his gloating against him and launching his body up into the rafters, where he crashed his back against a pillar and he dropped down with a huge thud. He got up with fury and anger, taking the broken pieces of his saber and igniting them once more as he spun around, swinging full with finesse and fury. She watched carefully and saw a hitch in his shoulder, using it to her advantage. She clacked the wall with one blade, and with the hitch in his shoulder, he swung down, missing her and getting cut through the back. Shaak Ti fell back on a broken table after the fact. She looked down to ensure the kill was finalized, before some other temple guards came to her side to make sure she was alright. She nodded, and asked where Masters Sunube and Jocasta were. The sister told her everything she needed to know, as the temple guard unit prepared to make their counter. Inside the executive building, Bail and the 6 temple guards rushed into the security room, wiping out the Coruscant guardsman stationed inside. The temple unit quickly got to work, scanning through the data and using the exact time Shaak Ti had given them to search the recordings. Bail kept his eyes on the hallways to make sure they were clear, and they were. Though there was an issue. The recordings from the Chancellor's office had been disrupted. They'd have to go into the office itself and pull the data if it was still present. Bail couldn't believe he was going to do this, but he suggested that they send him in. Palpatine couldn't afford to lose Alderaan, because Bail's own representative, or replacement, was even more against Palpatine than himself. That wouldn't bode well for the Chancellor. The guards looked to each other and agreed. Moments later, Bail was able to rush into the Chancellor's office. When he entered, he saw the dead body of Master Kit Fisto. A rushing wind was blowing through the air, and a royal guard called out to him, demanding to know why he was here. Bail asked for the Chancellor, and they explained that he wasn't in the building. Luckily for Bail, his comms were on, and the temple guards rushed the hall, killing the Chancellor's protectors, as they moved to complete the same task as before. Bail spent this entire time thinking about what could have happened to Palpatine, or where he went, and then it clicked. He told the guards to call Shaak Ti and inform her of the trap. They quickly did so, but they also revealed that their evidence was lost. Palpatine had deleted it. The Jedi were permanently doomed within the Senate, unless they could do something else, or prove their case guilt-free. Bail tried to conjure up an idea, but the guards needed to return to the temple. They offered a ride to the Senate building, which Bail accepted. Shaak Ti had removed everyone from the temple, sending them to different locations and coordinates. This included Tera Sunube and Jocasta Nu, 2 masters who were considerably older than herself. But Shaak Ti was taking complete control over the temple. This was her operation, as the last standing counselor present on Coruscant, considering Skywalker had clearly stepped down from his role. As she was moving Jedi to and from the temple, a trio of guardians joined her, promising to stick by her side to the very end. And she denied this, but they refused to abandon her after everything she had done. There were still pockets of blaster fire, and no one had seen Skywalker since Shaak Ti last saw him. For now, they had to roll with the notion that he had died. Everyone they could find was evacuated, with 4 duos of temple guards hunting for anyone else. Master T and her group of guards moved to the mouth of the temple, where Lord Sidious arrived. He walked through the halls of the temple. The last Sith to have done this was Bane's student. She managed to slip the defenses, but Palpatine overwhelmed them. Sidious asked her if she was going to fight with her guards. Wouldn't she fare better from a 1 versus 1? Master Windu preferred that. Of course, that came after he gutted Fisto and Saci and what was the other's name? Oh, Agan Kolar? Shaak Ti took a deep breath, not allowing the pain of their deaths to eat her up. She ignited her lightsaber and Palpatine grinned. What fun! The temple guard stepped away from their already exhausted master as she prepared for the final stand. Sidious leapt across the hall using the same Sith how he used against the other counselors. Shaak Ti used her same defensive strategy at first, before slipping into an aggressive assault. This would take everything she had left. Her single advantage here is that, unlike her brothers from the executive building, Palpatine wasn't able to place a riddle into her head. She rejected it, and therefore survived, unlike Kolar and Tin. Their blades continued to clash together in the middle of the hall, and she kept her distance from any oversteps that might cause her to fall. Unlike her duel with Skywalker, Palpatine was cold, calculated, and determined. He would finish what Skywalker couldn't. Their blades collided in the middle, and Palpatine mocked her prowess as she slipped away into Form 2 again, using the lightness of the form to be quick on her feet. Though she was fading fast. The duels, the fights, the emotional burdens were all taking a massive toll on her. As she started to lose her grip on the fight, another lightsaber ignited out from the left, and Palpatine released himself from their grip as he spun around and thrusted his saber over his head and redirected it, tossing Skywalker over him and onto the ground, where he found his footing. Anakin spun his saber without thinking or speaking. He knew his place now, and he drove his weapon at Sidious, as Shaak Ti tried to hold herself up with everything she had left. Her eyes darted over to Skywalker. Without his focus in the dark side, he was flashy, he was confident, and everything about him felt right. This was the chosen one, the one he was meant to be. The version of himself he tried to be, to fit in with the Sith, was not himself, and it was here where he showed off who he could truly be. They spun to match each other's speed, as Skywalker, also quite winded from his own rescue operation, was able to harmonize with himself. Their strikes got more intense the longer they continued on. Sidious saw his opportunities. There was a weakness in Skywalker's fighting style that Dooku always used, and it showed itself here and on the Invisible Hand. It would have been their first lesson together, but now it was going to be Skywalker's end. Palpatine and Anakin connected, and Sidious knocked his young opponent off balance, and right when the killing opportunity presented itself, the lightsaber threw his blade backwards and out of his hands. Sidious turned around to face Shaak Ti, who was now defenseless, but getting to her feet again. She stood there, almost as if she were accepting her fate. Sidious smiled to himself, looking down to Skywalker, who was on his back, looking up. He tried to stop Palpatine, but was thrown back with the shockwave of the Force. Sidious told her that she would have been a much more useful asset for the Sith. She didn't respond. Sidious just mocked her heroics, and launched his hands forward in an attempt to electrocute her. In her time on the Council, she had learned a lot, but this was one thing not taught, only learned through pursuit of knowledge and harmony with the Force. She twisted her hands and allowed the energy to pass towards her, and as she did, the light of the Force connected her and Palpatine, and as his body continued to pour lightning over hers, Palpatine's own body slowly stopped blasting electricity, and his body started to fall limp. Shaak Ti could feel the pain, but it started to get drowned out by her own adoration and love for those around her, and for the Jedi Order. The blinding light ended with silence, as Palpatine dropped to the ground and Shaak Ti fell again. Anakin ran to her side, trying to figure it out, as the other temple guards joined him. She shook her head and closed her eyes, focusing still, with the last of her energy, with the last of her life, and told those around her to trust always in the Force. As she said that, she took her own life and became one with it. What none of the others around her knew is that she allowed Palpatine to exert as much of his energy as he could at her, and she simply allowed it, absorbing him into her mind. However, this little trick of the Force was an exchange, a life for a life, and Shaak Ti was willing to give hers so that their order may survive. The aftermath of Order 66 would be chaos, and the surviving Jedi, Obi-Wan and Yoda, would return home. They would see Anakin as a hero of the Jedi, for saving the temple from the attack, but instead of relishing in his praise, he relayed the truth, one that would break Obi-Wan's and Yoda's hearts. They couldn't believe it, and in that same betrayal, they lost so many good friends. Though Yoda imparted a message, the Jedi do not take or seek revenge. Anakin may have been banished from the Jedi Order, but he was encouraged to better the lives of those around him. As he had clearly learned from Shaak Ti before her passing, there was more to give than to receive. It was in the Jedi way that Shaak Ti passed, and it was in that path that Anakin would learn to forgive himself for his own atrocities, ones that surely would transform the way the war would be viewed after the fact. Thanks to Anakin, the Separatist Council would be captured, but also thanks to him, the Jedi would have to go into hiding for a couple years. There would be tribunals following the war, some on Kaminoans, clones, Jedi, senators, and the business representatives. The war had taken a toll, and now that it was over, the very arduous process of rebuilding had to begin. Anakin's atrocities would add a slight shakeup to his marriage with Padme, but in his decision to better himself, they would make it, eventually. Though the Jedi would never return to Coruscant, they'd find home on Yavin 4, where there were temples already present, and the grounds for a few thousand survivors that remained. It wasn't more than 3,000, but it was a lot more than could have been. Shaak Ti would be immortalized as a Jedi legend in the far future. Her actions saved their kind, and while Maul was still on the loose, it would be Anakin who would defeat him in one-on-one combat that would finally extinguish the lineage of the Sith. The Jedi would return, and so would the Republic. They would be vastly different in their approach to interacting with the galaxy and in governance, but both would be better because of the tragedy of Order 66. the Jedi were able to be the guardians of peace and justice once more, while the Republic approached its position in the galaxy with pride and attention. They started to care where they should have always done so. Anakin would mirror the Order in his own life, becoming the person he should have always been when he was once a Jedi. But forever would he carry on the name who inspired him and saved him and the Jedi Order from complete and total destruction, while also instilling hope, compassion, and strength to face the darkness. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Noah Wells, Darth Maelstrom, Ozpin, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Gallivan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granite D. Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Colin Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlinger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Seth Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Callie, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Lakes Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, Man with 3 First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting channel, smash that like button. Giveaway down below. 3 Star Destroyers. Go and get them, bro. Get them out of here by Thanksgiving. I want to give you Star Destroyers, bro. Star Destroyers. Anyways, let's talk about the story. This is definitely a Shaak Ti story. This is a love letter to Shaak Ti 110%. I really wanted to focus on this dynamic with Shaak Ti and Anakin in the beginning of the story, and then I wanted to kind of play with this illusion that Anakin is dead, like this mystery that he dies during the conflict. Obviously, I didn't play on that too much, but I just kind of wanted it to be a lingering feeling like, oh, what if he actually did die in the what if? As for Shaak Ti in the story, I'm a firm believer that counselors are counselors for a reason. I think a lot of us forget that the counselors in episode 3 got killed because there was a riddle in their head and they were distracted because like 3 out of 4 of them were like, oh, let me solve the riddle for no reason, and then they did and they died. Their council masters, they really didn't get the love they should have gotten in my opinion, but I always try and give the counselors some sort of respect because they got to that level for some reason, and Shaak Ti got to that level for some reason, and I wanted to kind of show that here. Her being a counselor, her being a council master, she's killed enough and she's dead here, but at least she dies by her own accordance. So, a little bittersweet on that end, but I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.